each speaker echoing that this is not so much about punishing Donald Trump, but it's about preventing this kind of activity from ever being carried out by another president, making the case that President Trump incited the mob over a series of several months. He's had a pattern of behavior over several months, making the case, according to Congressman Ted Lieu, that at no time has the president shown any remorse for what he has done. In fact, he said it was totally appropriate. Making cases you just heard from David Cicilline right there, that the senators now standing in judgment of Donald Trump should act on behalf of the people who serve them every day, the staffers, the members of the Capitol Police Force who protect them. Rachel Scott up on Capitol Hill. It's pretty clear right now that we're getting towards the end game of the Democrats' argument in this trial, and that we're going to move relatively quickly to the Trump lawyers.
Yes, George, but even as they make these closing remarks of their opening arguments, it is clear that the senators inside of that chamber are getting restless inside. About 15 Republican seats spotted inside that were empty. As you heard, these House impeachment managers trying to make a plea with the senators, now jurors, to vote to convict. You also have a handful of Republican senators who are just struggling to stay awake here. Senator Lindsey Graham spotted rubbing his eyes. Senator Tom Carper had his eyes closed for portions of this. You have some Republicans who appear to have their minds already made up. Josh Hawley, we talked about how yesterday he had his feet up on the chair in front of him. Today he was going through a stack of papers. You have Senator Rick Scott. He is back with that map of Asia, now filling in different countries. And then you also have another group of Republican senators, those that appear to be keeping an open mind here. You have Senator Bill Cassidy, who you remember, he originally voted that the trial was unconstitutional, but after he saw that 13-minute long graphic video that the House impeachment managers played on day one, he changed his vote, voting with 6 Republicans and all Democrats for the trial to move forward. He has been taking extensive notes every single day. And yesterday, as they played that graphic, never before seen video, he was seen in the back of the chamber pacing around. We're also keeping our eyes on Republican leadership, notably Mitch McConnell. He had his hands crossed. He was stoic during these presentations, really listening in intently. House impeachment managers, aides to them, have said that they believe that the video evidence will change some minds here. But again, still an uphill battle. They need 17, George. Right now, it seems like only a handful have their minds open.
Okay, Rachel, thanks. Let me bring our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl. We just heard Rachel mention Mitch McConnell. Of course, he said he's keeping an open mind in this. And we saw in this testimony about all the Trump aides and cabinet officials who resigned, the 16 officials who resigned in the wake of the Capitol attack. Pointedly, Elaine Chao, Transportation Secretary, served all 4 years under President Trump, wife of Mitch McConnell.
Absolutely. She resigned not long after what we saw unfold on January 6th. That was a recurring theme here from the House managers, pointing to members of the Trump administration, also to leading Republican figures around the country, including Republican governors like Mike DeWine of Ohio, Governor Hogan of Maryland, who strongly came out and condemned Donald Trump and put the blame on him for what happened. But, George, today it seemed to be a bit of a kitchen sink approach from the House managers. They were making those arguments. Other Republicans who have come out and condemned Donald Trump, they were making the case that Trump was not remorseful for his actions on January 6th. They made the case that Trump, over the course of his presidency, and even going back to the 2016 campaign, going back to 2015, had incited violence before. And I think the danger for the House managers here is that less is more, and when you go in and you throw so much at these Republican senators, you take away from the power of the presentation they had yesterday, which focused squarely on the attack on January 6th and specifically on the actions of Donald Trump, both on that day and in the weeks and months leading up to that day that they argue caused that attack. I think they muddy the waters a little bit by throwing so much else in today. I'm not sure it's going to be effective with these Republican
senators.
And
perhaps taking that into account, that may be one of the reasons they're planning on wrapping up before taking their entire 16 hours. Cecilia Vega, our chief White House correspondent. John Karl mentioned there this focus on remorse, Ted Lieu's focus on the fact that the president hasn't shown remorse. Part of the evidence there, reports on what White House aides were seeing inside the White House on that day, which raises questions. Why not call them as witnesses?
And I can guarantee you this is something we're going to hear the Republican team, the Trump legal team, pounce on, because we knew that this was going to happen leading up to this. And this is one of the holes that they're looking at. You know, the Democrats here relied on reports, and these reports match our reporting that the president was focused on, in his anger on Mike Pence, that he delayed despite repeated requests from people in the inner circle to bring in the National Guard. But the reality is he was just livid. He was angry. But the Democrats are relying on news reports. This is an area where perhaps they could have actually called some people in from the Trump orbit, perhaps the chief of staff, perhaps people in the National Guard, to actually bring a human touch to this, to actually bring in some real testimony. But it gets back to that debate that had been happening internally among Democrats for so long leading up to this as to whether they should even bring in any witnesses at all. And it appears that they're leaning against it. They are leaving open the possibility that if someone in the Trump world came forward and said that they wanted to testify, that they would welcome them. But it doesn't appear that we're going to be hearing from witnesses. And the Republicans say that it shows that they didn't do their homework, that they didn't do an investigation here. So I guarantee that we're going to hear more about this coming up.
Okay, Cecilia, let me bring in Terry Moran. Of course, the big question, Terry, and this is being echoed by our other correspondents today. Are there any senators left on that floor with an open mind?
Well, I hope so. And it does seem, based on Rachel's eyewitness reporting there, that there are senators. There are some who are callous about it and ostentatiously paying no attention. But there are others who are doing their constitutional duty in there and listening carefully. And it has been, at times, a very powerful presentation. As John Karl said, you know, it is a lot to take in, especially with no witnesses. Witnesses under oath, you know, they're just better than newspaper articles and video clips if they're credible. And the decision not to bring in witnesses, especially to the point of what did Donald Trump say when someone said, tell your supporters to get out of the Capitol, to stop it. Please send the National Guard. Eyewitnesses could tell you what he actually said, and that would be very powerful evidence. They're foregoing it. But nevertheless, it does sound as if there are senators willing to take this seriously. But look at even Bill Cassidy, who decided that the presentation on whether or not the trial was constitutional was very persuasive by the House managers, and he's getting roasted back in Louisiana for it. He's getting just tattooed by the Republican Party. Local Republican parties will have not a whisper of dissent about Donald Trump's responsibility for the attack on January 6th.
Not on this, not yet. Let me bring in our legal team, Dan Abrams and Kate Shaw. And Dan, let me begin with you. As we look at the strategy going forward, just heard John Karl say you see the danger, at least, that it gets somewhat repetitive, dilutes the impact of yesterday's powerful testimony. And what about this question about calling in witnesses?
Right. First of all, I think the danger is that it starts to sound too political, really. Putting aside the sort of redundant, whether it's the kitchen sink, et cetera, I think the greatest danger is that they lose the focus on this is what Donald Trump said, this is what Donald Trump did, this is what happened. And I think they were very effective today in talking about what those rioters thought about Donald Trump's words. I think that is valuable to them. But then after that, they did start to sort of devolve into a sort of greatest hits against Donald Trump's presidency. Now, they would say it's relevant to show why the defense here, that he wasn't telling them to be violent. He wouldn't have supported this. The House managers would say, we brought that in to undermine that argument, to show he's done this before. He's doing it now. It is relevant, but there is that danger. Now, with regard to witnesses, I think when you're talking about sort of moving this forward, unless they've got a witness who can really offer something that is game-changing, something where someone says Donald Trump did or didn't do this on or around January 6th, I don't think there's a real chance that that's going to happen.
Unlikely it is going to happen. Kate Shaw, it is hard, though. This is also a relatively simple case. Everyone saw the siege of the Capitol. Everyone saw the president at times encourage those rioters. Everybody saw that he did nothing to stop it. And in sum, this is the kind of presidential conduct, clearly, maybe the framers couldn't have imagined, but it was certainly something they would try to prevent.
No, that's right. And I think that although it's a simple case, the point of today's presentation was to put it in the context of a broader course of conduct and rhetoric. So I actually thought that some of the material about Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer was actually pretty effective. So, the idea that some of the president's rhetoric had led or, had potentially some role in at least not denouncing other kinds of political violence. So that's just kind of widening the lens beyond just January 6th, but also it has kind of a forward-looking dimension, right? You heard again and again today about the purpose of these proceedings to be deterrent, right? The idea that if there isn't kind of the ultimate condemnation of what happened on January 6th, who knows how bad it could get the next time. So I think the case is simple, but I also think they're trying to put it in a larger context, both looking back and looking ahead.
Rahm Emanuel, effective politics?
Yes, because I think one thing, the short answer to that is yes, effective politics, because I think it continues to remind the American people that, to be blunt, Donald Trump has his hand on the bloody knife here. What I didn't hear, and I'm not a lawyer, everybody else or a lot of people on this show are, but the one thing, yesterday they brought it home to the senators. The senators, by their own actions on that day, acknowledged Donald Trump's role because they all placed phone calls to him, begging him to shut this off. There's only one person whose hand is on the on and off switch, Donald Trump. And the senators, in their own actions on January 6th, made calls to the White House, made calls to him, begging him to call this off and stop them. That call acknowledges his role, implicit and explicitly. The politics here is very good for Joe Biden because the American people turned the page in November on Donald Trump, and all this reminds them they don't like that temperature. That is not the America they know. They like 97.1 on the temperature dial, which is exactly where Biden was. We spent 4 years at 103 and a fever.
That's the question for Joe Biden, the political question for Joe Biden. Sarah Fagan, Republican strategist Sarah Fagan. How about these Republican senators? As Terry Moran pointed out, Bill Cassidy, others who have crossed the president in recent weeks have faced some pressure at home and faced the possibility of censure by their local Republican parties. That's the politics of the moment. How do they calculate the politics going forward if the president's actions and words leading up to January 6th and since January 6th aren't condemned in some way?
It's a real balancing act that these Republican senators are trying to walk. They want to distance themselves from that Capitol siege. It was horrible. Everybody acknowledges it. Everybody acknowledges Donald Trump had a role to play in how horrific it was. At the same time, Donald Trump has a huge grip still on the Republican Party, at least a large percentage of the base. It has, however, started to weaken. We saw that a 20-point drop in 1 month of the number of Republicans who think he should seek office in 2024. So that is the balancing act these senators are walking. How do I distance myself? How do I make some critical comments? How do I perhaps just try to get out of this on a constitutional argument and hope Donald Trump never comes back?
And John Karl, it also seems that part of the calculation is get this off the Senate floor as quickly as possible. We're hearing about the Trump legal team truncating the arguments. We're hearing about the possibility now of vote as early as Saturday, maybe Sunday.
It certainly looks like the Trump legal team will not use anywhere near all of their allotted time. They will make their case. This is unconstitutional. They will make the case that Donald Trump did not incite what happened on January 6th in a legal sense. But, George, this is one of those strange times in Washington where everybody's interests align. The Republicans, the Trump, certainly the Trump team, the Biden White House, the Democrats in the Senate. Everybody here wants this trial to be over as soon as possible. And it does look like it will likely be over this weekend, although things in the Senate always tend to go a little bit longer than you expected, but we're headed towards an end within the coming days.
Terry Moran, that's the politics of the moment. Is it fulfillment of the duty of these senators?
Well, that is what they're being forcefully reminded of by the House managers. I thought Representative Raskin, they all touched on this issue. He put it most forcefully, I think, when he said, if we don't draw the line here, what's next? What makes you think this nightmare with Donald Trump and his violent mobs is over? And not just Trump. What makes you think it can't happen to our democracy again. This thing is now in the bloodstream of the body politic. The FBI and law enforcement recognize that we have a domestic insurgency, domestic terrorism in this country based, on the MAGA movement coming out of that. Obviously, not everybody who supported that is part of that, but there's no question that that is where law enforcement has its eyes trained. Who's to say that if Trump is seen to have been acquitted and exonerated and that mob, there's no accountability for summoning it and directing it, who's to say it's not to happen again? I think that is what the House managers are trying to force the senators to look at. That's what the framers of the Constitution hoped senators would look at, the health of the democracy as a whole in the present moment and beyond.
And take themselves out of the present moment. Pierre, Thomas, even if this is wrapped up relatively quickly this weekend, there is going to be case after case in federal courts with those who were part of the riots, who've already said, many of them, that they were directed by President Trump. You also have the possibility of civil cases and, of course, now a criminal investigation of the president's activities in Fulton County, Georgia.
George, this is ongoing, and as you mentioned, of the 200 people arrested so far, roughly 20 have said directly or through their attorneys that they came to the Capitol at the direction of the President of the United States at that time, Donald Trump. That's what they've said on the record in connection with their cases. Now, how much good that will do them in court, I don't know, but they're clearly aligning themselves with being there because of the President. The one thing I would add, too, George, is that law enforcement is focused on two things. One is wrapping up as many of these people as possible who were involved in January 6th and the ongoing threat that they see coming out of it. That there are people out there who showed themselves willing and able with resources and weapons to come to the Capitol and possibly other places to commit violence. And we're getting new detail today about the fact that law enforcement is investigating whether, in addition to the people who were at the Capitol with pipes and baseball bats and chemical weapons like bear mace, that possibly there may have been others who were at the ready who may have had access to firearms, George.
Okay, Pierre. Dan, when we pick up on that question of the president's legal exposure going forward, both in these court cases that are being investigated now of the rioters and the possibility perhaps of a civil case.
I mean, look, there's always the possibility of a civil case, right? I mean, in any situation, if you can show the what's called the proximate cause of something, you can end up suing someone. I think you're going to see civil lawsuits in some way, shape, or form filed against the president. I don't know, whether those are going to succeed. I think that the question that people are really focusing on is, could the president be charged criminally? I think that's unlikely. I think that you could use some of the similar language, not the exact same, but similar language to that's been used in the context of the impeachment to consider a federal charge. But I think that President Biden has made it clear that that's not something that he's really interested in. And I can assure you that if the former president of the United States was going to get indicted by the Justice Department, this would not be a decision made by a local government official.
Well, no, that's clearly on the federal, and you're right about what President Biden has said, and he's trying to take a distance from any decision that the Justice Department might make. But you do have this active grand jury in Fulton County, and the president's documented activities trying to overturn that election. The call to Raffensperger saying, "Find me the votes."
So I view that as kind of a separate investigation. You've got that investigation. Whether that, again, I think that the problem with these kinds of investigations is they can never be purely legal, meaning you want them to be. You say that they are. You say that we're just looking at the facts and applying them to the law. And yet when you're talking about something that of this magnitude, there are going to be, and when I say political implications, I don't mean Republican versus Democrat. I mean bigger picture decisions that have to be made about whether moving forward is worth it. And that's the decision making that will have to go in, because we know a lot of the facts in Fulton County. I don't think that they're going to they may uncover additional calls, et cetera, but we know a lot of the facts about what happened.
That's right, Kate Shaw. When it comes to the president or former president of the United States, if you're going to bring a case, you better be pretty sure you're going to win.
No, that's right. But actually looking at the Georgia election statute, solicitation of election fraud, it doesn't sound like a terribly complicated case to make out. And just based on the phone call that we all heard, there's certainly a plausible case to be made that former President Trump violated that Georgia election law. So I'm not sure I agree with Dan, only that a local prosecutor, may be able to try to put aside these larger national political questions and really focus on just were the elements of this state crime satisfied, and if so, to bring the charge. So, I of course don't know what's going to happen, but it certainly seems likely that there's real possibility of serious criminal exposure, again, on a state law question in Fulton County, Georgia.
Well, and of course,
as to the federal.
Go ahead.
No, please go ahead, George. I was going to say, as to the federal prosecution question, I don't. To me, in some ways, like insofar as the impeachment trial feels rushed or incomplete, I wonder whether that doesn't increase the likelihood that accountability questions shift to the federal criminal domain. And it's certainly the case that President Biden would stay very clear of any such decisions made by a Justice Department. But, I wonder, a full impeachment trial that felt like it really aired all the issues, whether that might sort of serve interest in accountability, not in a formal way would preclude a criminal prosecution, but might sort of lower the level of interest in pursuing it. And, conversely, if this feels rushed or incomplete, whether that increases the likelihood that we do see some, at least, examination of this question by the Justice Department.
Well, not just the Justice Department, Kate. Sean, I'll bring this to Terry Moran. The question of accountability doesn't begin and end with impeachment. Congress has oversight, and there's no reason for the Congress not to have a 9/11 type commission to look at another act of terrorism against the Capitol of the United States.
Absolutely, and they may well do that because congressional investigations with the power of subpoena, with the ability to go on for an extended period of time in ordinary committee business, and therefore delve deeply into the facts here with sworn testimony and with subpoenas, bringing witnesses who were in the room with President Trump when he was being asked to send in help to tell his supporters to stop, what his conduct was like, lay the record down that way, and have some historical accountability with a factual account like that. However, impeachments are special. They're different. They are for high crimes and misdemeanors, as Alexander Hamilton said, political offenses that stem from the abuse or violation of a public trust or office. That's what the allegation is here. And impeachment and conviction is designed to protect the society in a very different way than the ordinary criminal law. That's why the standards are different. It's designed to protect the democracy, not just the safety, physical safety of society, but the spiritual safety of the democracy itself. That's why this is so important.
It is, and that is why it is enshrined in the Constitution. Rahm Emanuel, you've been pretty clear that the Democrats have had to go forward with this impeachment trial. What happens next in the wake of an acquittal, if indeed there is an acquittal, even if you get more Republican senators voting to convict than you did last time around? What should the Democrats do next?
I mean, that's they're going to get to that, that infamous Yogi Bear quote, which is when you get to a fork in the road, take it. Because you don't want to look. Right now, they've done a great job in the case, staying to the facts, reminding people of literally how close we came and individuals in that room came to violence themselves and being victims of violence. If it looks like you just can't let go of Donald Trump, this thing can flip on the knife's edge right back on you and do a backflip. And so I would say, they're going to have to take the trial. They're going to go all the way in. You have an exit ramp. I think it's coming very, very close, whether you want to send this off to committee and deal quickly the same day with a censure or something like that. But my guess is when this is done, maybe something comes out of Georgia. I do want to take note, every president appoints all the U.S. attorneys. You're going to have new U.S. attorneys down in Georgia. They're going to look at whatever is being investigated, not just in Fulton County, but also at the state level.
Yeah, that is true.
That may elevate itself to a federal. Then thank God I've never been in the line of sight of a U.S. attorney, but they have a reputation they also want to build. And as was said by Mr. Abrams, there's politics involved. They may decide this is the case. So, there's other venues. And my guess, when Congress is done, the books get closed.
Okay, Rahm. John Karl, we're hearing from the president's attorneys. David Schoen.
Yeah, also actually from Bruce Castor just now. He was the one that did the opening arguments for the Trump defense team, that long, meandering presentation. And he was asked his reaction to the video of the insurrectionists saying directly that they were there at the invitation of Donald Trump. And this is interesting, George. Bruce Castor said to the reporter, did someone say they heard directly from President Trump to do that, meaning to invade the Capitol? And the reporter said, yes, that's what they were saying. They were saying they were there at the invitation of Donald Trump. And then Castor said, I don't believe that's what happened. No. So it seems that one of the president's lawyers is making the argument that unless literally the insurrectionists got a phone call from Donald Trump saying, go into the Capitol, that Donald Trump was not to be blamed. The other attorney, David Schoen, did an interview just a short while ago on Fox, and he made it clear that their presentation will be short. He said that I've always said this trial should never have happened, and if it happened, it should be as short as possible, given, he says, the complete lack of evidence. And he also made the argument that the House case, that this entire impeachment process is dividing the country. So that's a little bit of a precursor of what we'll hear from the Trump legal team.
And John, let me ask you a version of a question I just asked Rahm Emanuel. For the president himself, if indeed he does get acquitted in the coming days, do we have any sense of how he plans, if at all, to reemerge both on the political scene and in public, more generally?
Well, you know, this is a moving target. My sense, speaking to the people that are still advising the president on his political moves, is that once the trial is over, he would be prepared to begin to have his reemergence. You know, we really haven't heard anything from him since he left the White House. In fact, very little from him since January 6th. What I have been told over this period of time is that once this trial is over, we will begin to see him, and he very much wants to play a role in the Republican Party. And George, I think the first thing that we're going to see from him is an attempt to get revenge on any Republican that crossed him during this process, any Republican that supported impeachment or wasn't sufficiently strong in opposing it in his mind.
And says, thank you, John. And Cecilia Vega, we are starting to see President Biden speak out a bit more on what he's seeing on the Senate floor.
A slow trickle, George. He said he watched the news reports after yesterday in that riveting hearing in the videos. He said that he found them, or his team said that he found them harrowing and deeply disturbing. He actually says after seeing that video, he believes it may have been powerful enough to change some minds in that chamber. Of course, that remains to be seen, but it really is the most we've heard from him on this front. He's still trying to stay above the fray on this. The White House says that he may end up speaking at length or greater in detail if he sees fit. But it's hard to overstate how much this hearing and this trial is hanging over this White House, even though they sort of are taking this nothing to see here approach to it. Every event that President Biden has had with precedent over the last few days, this has been the first question that he has been asked. And I was in the briefing yesterday with the press secretary, and it was question after question on impeachment. So they can't dodge this. They're still trying to play the silent card in this. I've also asked Democrats, frankly, on the Hill if they, are they missing anything in President Biden's silence? And they're really not. Everybody who knows him there says they're not looking for guidance from the president on this one. They all know what their job is. And he very much, after spending 36 years in the Senate himself, is very much of the mind that let the Senate be the Senate, let the Senate do their job. I will weigh in when I have to. But for him, as we've been saying again over and over, their focus really is right now on getting this COVID relief bill passed by next month.
And as Rahm Emanuel suggested, he doesn't feel the need, in fact, sees it as a political imperative not to be dominating the news every day in the way that Donald Trump did for 4 years. Rachel Scott, let's look ahead to what we should expect in the coming hours of today and over the next couple of days.
Well, today is really focused on that issue of remorse. You see these House impeachment managers making the case that former President Donald Trump had no remorse. And this is really the closing chapter for this roadmap that they have been laying out now over 3 days, saying that Trump provoked it, saying that his baseless claims that the election was rigged was the drumbeat that then incited the mob. And then after it happened, even after his own vice president was put into danger, he did not show any remorse, they claim. Then we will see former President Trump's defense, and they are going to push back strongly on that. This phrase that they keep using, fight like hell, that Trump said that day, his team is going to argue that of the 10,000 words that he spoke that day, he only said the word fight only a handful of times. But I will say after yesterday's presentation, George, there's still some questions about what did Trump know and when did he know it? This issue of whether or not he knew that Vice President Mike Pence had been evacuated from the chamber. Senator Tuberville talking to Trump that day, saying that he spoke with him, saying that he was the one that told him that Pence had been evacuated. But then we also saw in that same hour, that 2 p.m. hour that day on January 6th, Trump was still tweeting for Pence to have courage. So there's still some open-ended questions here after that video presentation and that detailed evidence that the House impeachment manager showed yesterday, George.
Okay, Rachel Scott. Sarah Fake, I want to come back to you. We've all been suggesting that 17 is an awful high bar, getting the 17 Republicans needed for conviction. But we've seen 6 Republicans who voted at one point for the trial to go forward. Is that what we should expect on conviction necessarily? You think is that the ceiling? Is that the floor? Is that the number?
It's probably right around 6, maybe a couple more, based on, I think the Democrats deserve credit. They've laid out a very powerful case against the former president. You know, at the same time, many of these Republicans just want to get this over with. This is uncomfortable to watch. And even though most of these senators have spoken out against what happened on the 6th and have been critical of Donald Trump, I think just unfortunately for Republicans, by definition, when we're talking about this instance of a former Republican president, it's a stain on the entire House. And so the party wants this behind them. They're not going to be able to get rid of Donald Trump entirely. But as time goes on, as a new leader emerges, as 2024 becomes more in the sights of the political process, there will be other voices that are louder. And that is where the Republicans have to get to. And it's going to be a rough couple of years. But there is end in sight.
That is an understatement, perhaps. Kate Shaw, though, if indeed 6 Republican senators vote for conviction here, that would be significant. That would be the most senators of the president's own party who ever voted to convict, I believe, and that would send a message along with the fact that they actually pursued a second impeachment of a president, a former president.
Yeah, I have to say, so just over a year ago, when President Trump was facing his first impeachment trial, he became the first sitting president ever to have a member of his own party vote to convict him in the Senate, although some of the president's co-partisans had voted in the House, for example, with Bill Clinton. But in the Senate, that was a first when Mitt Romney voted to convict on one of the articles last time. So I actually think it would be really historically significant if 5 or 6 or 7 or more members of President Trump's own party did vote to convict. It would actually be sort of symbolically really a significant condemnation, even if it obviously wouldn't lead to the formal conviction and then the possibility of moving to a vote to disqualify, because that would be a separate vote, but you would only get there if you first got to 67 on the votes to convict. But yes, I mean, I think that impeachments do need to be understood not just as holding sort of meaning of, you know, conviction is a condemnation and acquittal is necessarily an exoneration. Their meaning is much more complex than that. So I think having held the trial at all and potentially getting a number of members of President Trump's own party to agree and convict him, that in and of itself, from the perspective of history, would actually be very significant.
And Dan Abrams, picking up on that, one of the arguments you heard, particularly in last year's impeachment, certainly during Bill Clinton's impeachment as well, is that the bar to impeachment had been lowered. The president's attorneys were trying to make that case in some form in the opening arguments. But it's difficult to say that you're lowering the bar for impeachment when you're dealing with an insurrection against the Capitol.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I don't think that's sort of one of the strong arguments for the Republicans here. But I do have to say, though, we're talking about history, right? And we sit here, we talk about, well, there was 1 Republican or there were 5 Republicans. Or, I think historically, maybe 20, 30 years from now, that stuff will kind of matter a bit. But I don't know that it's going to matter in the short term. I don't know that next year or the year after, the fact that 5 or 6 Republicans voted to convict Donald Trump is going to have any impact at all. And I would say something thinking about the first impeachment process, where we heard the presentation from the House managers. And I remember all of us, as we sat here, were thinking that was a very powerful presentation from them. And it has already become, to many, a bit of a footnote. So just something to think about.
That's for another question. How will it look from the vantage point of history? Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.